Close your eyes and imagine a land both ancient and eternal. The wind rustles through bamboo groves. A jade-colored river flows quietly past sun-baked terraces. Lantern light flickers in the shadows of carved wooden eaves. In this land, time stretches back through millennia, where each dynasty, like a thread in a great silk tapestry, weaves its legacy into the grand design of Chinese history. China's story is not a single tale, but a succession of worlds built atop one another. Dynasties rise like morning mist and fall like autumn leaves. From semi-legendary beginnings to the sophistication of imperial courts, from warlord uprisings to civil service exams, from Taoist sages to Confucian scholars, the rhythm of Chinese history unfolds like a scroll. The dynasties we'll explore tonight are not just lines in a textbook. They were living, breathing societies' vast and complex worlds of thought, law, poetry, and power. And while some names may sound distant, Shang, Han, Tang, Ming, each contains stories of real people, farmers and generals, emperors and engineers, monks and midwives. As we move gently across centuries, we'll pause to explore daily life, the hum of marketplaces, the rituals of the imperial court, the quiet beauty of gardens and scrolls. We begin with the Xia Dynasty, the hazy dawn of recorded history, wrapped in legend. Then onward to the Shang and Zhou, where oracle bones crack with ancient divinations, and bronze vessels are cast in ritual fires. We'll walk the imperial roads of the Qin and Han, and watch as paper, silk, and the idea of China itself begin to take shape. As we drift through the dynasties, the Sui and Tang, the Song and Yuan, the Ming and Qing, will trace a civilization's changing face. Dynasties expand and contract like the breath of the dragon, the symbol of emperors and of China itself. One dynasty may last centuries, another only a few decades, yet each contributes something essential to the whole. Political systems evolve, philosophies deepen, cities rise and fall, but the current of culture flows ever onward. Each chapter of tonight's story will guide you through a different era, and at every step, we'll slow the pace to notice the fine brushstrokes in a scroll painting, the taste of lotus root in a humble meal, or the clang of steel during a dynastic rebellion. The narrative is chronological, unfolding like a river always moving forward, always reflecting. You may wonder how such a long and intricate history can be remembered, and the answer lies partly in the continuity of Chinese civilization. While dynasties changed, the written script remained remarkably stable. A poem penned in the Tang Dynasty could be read centuries later under Qing rule. This continuity of language, literature, and philosophy allowed the past to speak clearly to the present, even across the divide of generations. The dynastic cycle, a concept developed by Chinese historians, helps us understand the pattern of rise, golden age, decline, and fall. It was believed that emperors ruled by the mandate of heaven, a divine approval tied to virtue and wise governance. But when rulers became corrupt or ineffective, heaven would withdraw its mandate and rebellion would follow. In this rhythm of rise and fall, Chinese history flows like waves across time. As you relax into this tale, remember that it is meant to soothe as well as teach. You do not need to recall every emperor's name or every battle fought. Instead, let the imagery wash over you. Let the tranquil cadence of time ease you into rest. Like tea steeping in a porcelain cup, history here unfolds slowly, delicately, with warmth and subtlety. And so we begin, not with thunder or drama, but with gentle breath. The yellow river flows beside us. The ancestors whisper in forgotten dialects. The dragon stirs in the earth, and the phoenix takes flight. Together we turn back the pages of time all the way to the very beginning. Our journey begins with the Xia. As we gently step into the earliest ages of Chinese civilization, we enter a time shrouded in mist and myth, the era of the Xia Dynasty. Though its historical existence has long been debated, recent archaeological finds in the Yellow River Valley suggest that some form of early state may well have existed. The Xia, traditionally dated from around 2070 to 1600 BCE, marks the starting point of dynastic China. Legend tells us of Yu the Great, the founder of the Xia. He is remembered not for conquest, but for taming floods. Imagine him standing at the banks of the raging Yellow River, guiding channels with stone tools and laborers, not to block the water, but to lead it like a sage negotiating with nature. His success in flood control, according to myth, earned him the right to rule, and thus the dynasty was born. Daily life during the Xia would have been simple. People lived in small agricultural settlements near rivers and streams. They tilled millet fields with bone tools and cooked meals over open hearths. Families likely lived in sunken dwellings made from earth and timber. Music, already deeply embedded in Chinese culture, may have filled the evening's soft drums and flutes echoing across the valleys. Though we have no written records from the Xia themselves, they left behind jade artifacts, bronze knives, and burial mounds that whisper of early hierarchy and craftsmanship. As we drift forward in time, the Shang Dynasty emerges around 1600 BCE, and with it, the dawn of written history in China. Now we find evidence not only in soil and stone, but in the etched lines of oracle bones. These were pieces of ox shoulder blades or turtle shells, heated until they cracked. Diviners interpreted these cracks to seek guidance from ancestors and spirits. Questions about harvests, weather, and wars were carved into the bones, an early form of Chinese script, delicate yet deliberate. The Shang were masters of bronze metallurgy. In the flickering glow of foundry fires, artisans cast ceremonial vessels adorned with teoti symmetrical, mask-like creatures with bulging eyes. These objects were not merely decorative. They were part of religious rites, used to honor ancestors and maintain harmony between the earthly and the spiritual. The capital cities of the Shang, such as Anyang, the last of their dynastic centers, housed noble families, priests, warriors, and skilled laborers. Imagine broad, packed earth walls encircling a city of wooden halls and courtyards, where the king performed rituals and ruled over surrounding villages. Below the elite, farmers grew millet and rice, tended to water buffalo, and paid tribute in grain. The Shang worldview was deeply spiritual. Ancestors were revered as active forces in daily life. Kings acted as intermediaries between the human world and the divine. The idea of heaven, or Tian, would not yet be fully formed, but already there was a sense that harmony came from right conduct, ritual propriety, and balance between visible and invisible realms. As the Shang weakened, another power began to rise in the West, the Zhou Dynasty, which would become the longest-lasting dynasty in Chinese history. Around 1046 BCE, King Wu of Zhou overthrew the last Shang ruler, said to be corrupt and tyrannical. The Zhou justified their conquest with a new political philosophy, the mandate of heaven. This idea that heaven grants the right to rule based on virtue would become central to Chinese thought for over 2,000 years. Unlike divine right in other civilizations, the mandate of heaven could be revoked. When a ruler failed to govern with justice and wisdom, heaven would signal its disapproval through natural disasters, uprisings, or famine. A just ruler had the mandate, a cruel one lost it. Thus, the dynastic cycle was born. The early Zhou period, known as the Western Zhou, saw a feudal system take shape. The king granted land to relatives and loyal generals, who in turn ruled over local populations. These lords paid tribute to the central court and contributed troops in times of war. Bronze inscriptions from this era speak of rituals, military campaigns, and the duties of loyalty and service. Life in a Zhou village was rhythmic and seasonal. Families rose with the sun, working in orchards or paddies. Children gathered mulberry leaves for silkworms and elders told stories of dragons and ancestral deeds. Confucian values had not yet crystallized, but the foundations of filial piety, respect for one's parents and lineage, were already in place. It was during the Zhou period that iron tools began to supplement bronze. Farming became more efficient, population grew, and the landscape transformed. Markets buzzed with activity. Merchants traded salt, lacquerware, and textiles. Roads and canals expanded under royal direction, linking disparate regions into a fragile but growing web of unity. But unity would not last forever. By 771 BCE, internal rebellions and foreign invasions weakened the central authority. The Zhou court was forced to flee eastward, beginning the era known as the Eastern Zhou. Though still called a dynasty, the Zhou kings now held little power beyond ceremony. Regional states grew strong and independent, competing for dominance in what became known as the Spring and Autumn period. It is here that some of China's greatest thinkers would arise, sages who sought to bring order to a fractured world. We will meet them in the next chapter. For now, rest in the knowledge that even in turmoil, the thread of civilization was unbroken. By 475 BCE, as the Warring States period began, 7 major states vied for supremacy. Yet amid the chaos, new schools of philosophy flourished: Confucianism, Taoism, and legalism, each offering a different vision of harmony, law, and human nature. It is a time of paradox, political strife, alongside cultural brilliance. As we draw this chapter to a close, let us reflect on how the foundations of Chinese civilization were laid. From the legendary flood tamer Yu to the ritual bronze casters of the Shang and the feudal lords of the Zhou, a pattern was forming of dynastic rule, ancestor worship, agricultural economy, and philosophical exploration. These early centuries would cast a long shadow over all that followed. Now, dear listener, take a gentle breath. Let the stars of ancient Anyang twinkle softly above. Let the scent of earth and incense drift around you. The dynasties are changing. The philosophers are waiting. The First Empire draws near. We now move into the age of unification, the Qin and Han dynasties. As we drift into the 3rd century BCE, we find China fragmented, a chessboard of rival states, each maneuvering for supremacy. And yet, amid the strife, one state rises above the rest: Qin. Hardened by years of warfare and guided by a strict legalist philosophy, the Qin would achieve what no dynasty before them could: the unification of China. In 221 BCE, the Qin king Yingzheng declared himself Shu Huangdi, the first emperor of a united China. His title was unprecedented, blending Shu, the legacy of legendary sages, with Huangdi, the exalted rulers of myth. This was not merely a new ruler, but a new era. Shi Huangdi centralized power with remarkable speed. Gone were the feudal lords of the Zhou. In their place, the empire was divided into administrative commanderies, governed by appointed officials loyal to the throne. Roads, canals, and communication lines expanded, connecting provinces like never before. A standardized system of weights, measures, currency, and even written script brought coherence to the newly unified state. The Qin were also builders. Picture thousands of laborers toiling across plains and mountains, erecting the early walls that would one day become the Great Wall of China. These walls were built not from stone, but from tamped earth, thick, layered, and tall, a defense against nomadic raiders from the north. Though fragmented and crude compared to later versions, these early ramparts were a symbol of unity and protection. Yet the same hand that brought order also brought harshness. The Qin legal code was unforgiving. Minor infractions were met with severe punishments. Scholars who questioned the emperor's authority were silenced. Famously, Shi Huangdi ordered the burning of books and the burial of dissenting scholars, a tragic moment of cultural loss. Still, the emperor dreamed beyond his lifetime. His mausoleum, located near modern Xi'an, is a marvel of ambition. Beneath an artificial hill lies a vast underground palace, surrounded by the terracotta army, thousands of life-sized soldiers, horses, and chariots, crafted in detail to accompany the emperor into the afterlife. No two faces are alike. Each soldier seems to whisper a story of craftsmanship, imperial pride, and eternal vigilance. But the Qing Dynasty, for all its grandeur, was short-lived. The strain of forced labor, high taxes, and strict laws stirred unrest. Just 4 years after Shi Huangdi's death, rebellion erupted. By 206 BCE, the Qin had fallen. Rising from the chaos came a man of humble origins, Liu Bang, a former peasant and soldier who would found the Han Dynasty. He took the name Emperor Gaozu, and under his rule a new chapter began, one of stability, prosperity, and intellectual revival. The Han Dynasty would last over 4 centuries, from 206 BCE to 220 CE, and is considered one of the golden ages of Chinese civilization. Even today, many Chinese people refer to themselves as Han Chinese, a reflection of the dynasty's enduring legacy, where the Qin ruled with fear, the Han sought balance. The legalist framework was softened by the moral philosophy of Confucianism, which emphasized benevolence, proper conduct, and harmony in relationships. Confucian scholars became central to government, selected through early forms of civil examinations based on classical texts. Daily life in Han China was vibrant and diverse. In cities, scholars copied scrolls in calligraphy studios. Merchants traded silk, lacquerware, and spices in bustling markets. In the countryside, farmers plowed fields with iron tools and raised silkworms in quiet mulberry groves. Music filled the air, flutes, zithers, and drums, while poets penned verses about moonlit rivers and the fleeting nature of time. One of the Han's greatest contributions was the opening of the Silk Road, a network of trade routes connecting China with Central Asia, the Middle East, and even the Roman Empire. Through these routes, not only goods, but ideas flowed. Buddhism entered China, as did foreign fashions, spices, and astronomical knowledge. Imagine camel caravans crossing desert sands, bearing bolts of silk and fragrant cinnamon, guided by stars and prayer. At the heart of the Han bureaucracy was a merit-based civil service. Talented individuals were selected not by birth, but by education and virtue. This concept of governance would remain central to Chinese administration for nearly 2,000 years. The capital, Chang'an, was a marvel, a grid-planned city of palaces, temples, gardens, and bustling streets. At court, emperors received tribute from distant lands, while astronomers charted celestial movements to determine auspicious days for rituals and decrees. One of the most revered Han emperors was Wu Di, or Emperor Wu. His reign, from 141 to 87 BCE, marked a time of expansion and consolidation. Under him, Han influence stretched deep into modern Vietnam, Korea, and Central Asia. He also formalized Confucianism as the state ideology and founded an imperial university to train officials. But even golden ages fade. In the later Han years, court factions, eunuchs, and powerful landowners undermined central authority. Peasant revolts, like the Yellow Turban Rebellion, revealed deep unrest. Natural disasters were seen as signs that the emperor had lost the mandate of heaven. In 220 CE, the Han Dynasty officially ended, giving way to the Three Kingdoms, a time of division and war. But the Han ideal remained a model. Later dynasties would look back to it as a standard of just rule, cultural sophistication, and imperial grandeur. As you rest in the soft glow of this chapter, consider how far China had come from feuding states to unified empire, from oracle bones to international trade, from peasant rebels to philosopher kings. The story of Qin and Han is one of contrast, of harshness and harmony, of ruin and renewal. Now, let your mind drift down the silk-laden roads of Chang'an. Hear the camel bells in the distance, the rustle of robes in the imperial court, and the scratch of brush on bamboo scroll. The Han may have passed, but the soul of China endures ready to rise once more. In our next chapter, we journey into the dazzling brilliance of the Tang and Song dynasties, where poetry and invention reach new heights. As we continue drifting forward, the air grows sweet with incense, and the sound of poetry hums on the breeze. After centuries of division and uncertainty, China enters an age of radiance, the Tang and Song dynasties. Together, they form a golden age of culture, innovation, and beauty, stretching from the 7th to the 13th century. Let us begin with the Tang Dynasty, which rose in 618 CE, following the brief but foundational Sui dynasty. The Sui had reunified China after centuries of fragmentation, but it was the Tang who turned unity into splendor. Under their rule, the empire expanded westward into Central Asia and flourished as a cosmopolitan superpower. The capital city of Chang'an, revived once more, was the largest and most sophisticated city in the world at the time. Imagine a meticulously planned grid of broad avenues and lush gardens, filled with markets, temples, and scholars from every corner of Asia. Foreign diplomats, traders, and monks walked its avenues. Buddhists chanted in monasteries beside Taoist mystics and Confucian academies. Under emperors like Taizong and Xuanzong, the empire thrived. The state was efficient and educated, powered by the revived civil service examination system, now deeply rooted in Confucian ideals. Brilliant minds, not noble birth, filled the bureaucracy, ensuring that governance was grounded in scholarship and moral principle. Yet the Tang were not just administrators, they were lovers of art. This was the age of Chinese poetry, when verses were written not just by scholars, but by emperors and courtiers. The names of Li Bai, Du Fu, and Wang Wei ring softly through time, their stanzas capturing everything from drunken moonlit revelry to the quiet sorrow of war. Poetry contests were held at banquets, with cups of wine floating down small streams, the writer of the next poem having to pluck the cup and compose before drinking. Tang painters captured landscapes with delicate brushstrokes, showing mist-draped mountains and solitary scholars under pine trees. Buddhist sculpture reached new levels of grandeur, and the Dunhuang caves carved into the desert cliffs blossomed with vivid murals of heavenly bodhisattvas and celestial musicians. Religion flourished in this diverse empire. Buddhism, brought from India centuries earlier, now took deep root. Monasteries dotted the landscape, serving not only as spiritual centers, but as places of learning, charity, and refuge. Taoism offered its own vision of harmony, emphasizing nature, meditation, and the pursuit of immortality. Meanwhile, Confucianism remained the backbone of the state, grounding society in order and ethics. Yet, as with all dynasties, the Tang too would decline. In the mid-8th century, the An Lushan rebellion tore through the empire, bringing destruction and a deep wound to the dynasty's stability. Though the Tang recovered, its golden glow faded, and by 907 CE, the dynasty had crumbled, giving way once more to a period of division. But just as the night gives way to dawn, a new brilliance emerged, the Song Dynasty, beginning in 960 CE. Where the Tang had been bold and outward-looking, the Song were introspective, scholarly, and quietly revolutionary. The Song Dynasty was an era of unmatched intellectual and technological achievement. Though smaller in territory than the Tang, the Song governed a society of great economic vitality. Cities like Kaifeng and Hangzhou bustled with markets, schools, theaters, and restaurants. A population boom, improved agriculture, and internal trade brought prosperity to even the humblest villages. It was in the Song that printing with movable type emerged, centuries before Gutenberg in Europe. The widespread availability of books transformed education and literacy. Libraries swelled with Confucian classics, medical texts, Buddhist sutras, and encyclopedias. Families taught their children not only how to farm, but how to read and write. One of the greatest song inventions was paper money, a response to the needs of a growing commercial economy. No longer bound by bulky coins, merchants and travelers could carry wealth in the form of elegantly printed notes backed by the government. In the fields, the cultivation of early ripening rice from Vietnam doubled harvests and fed a population that may have reached 100 million. Terraced paddies glittered across the southern hills, tended by families whose work sustained the empire. This was also the era of profound philosophy. Song thinkers like Zhu Xi developed Neo-Confucianism, a blending of Confucian ethics with metaphysical inquiry. He wrote of principle, Yat Lai, and material force, Qi, seeking to understand the universe and the place of the individual within it. Education became a moral journey, not just a means to office, but a path to self-cultivation. Art reached new levels of refinement. Song landscape painting, especially in ink on silk or paper, sought not realism but resonance. Mountains were not just terrain, but symbols of the Tao, enduring, silent, eternal. Scholars retreated to study pavilions and bamboo groves, sketching waterfalls and plum blossoms in quiet contemplation. The imperial examination system became more rigorous than ever before, producing generations of scholar officials who governed with a sense of duty, decorum, and classical learning. These officials, known as the literati, became cultural leaders as well as administrators, shaping policy and taste alike. But the song also faced mounting threats. In the north, nomadic powers such as the Khitan Liao, Jurchen Jin, and eventually the Mongols pressed against the empire's borders. Despite their cultural brilliance, the song struggled militarily. In 1127, the Jurchen invasion forced the court to flee south, marking the beginning of the Southern Song period. Though diminished in territory, the Southern Song remained a beacon of culture and innovation. Maritime trade expanded. Compasses guided merchant ships to India, Arabia, and Southeast Asia. Porcelain, silk, tea, and calligraphy found new audiences abroad. Still, shadows lengthened. The greatest challenge yet loomed on the horizon. A rising power from the steppes, led by a warlord who would conquer more land than any before him, Genghis Khan. His descendants would bring an end to the song and usher in the Yuan Dynasty. But for now, let us linger in the serene beauty of Song China. Let us walk along Hangzhou's West Lake, its waters mirror still under the moon. Let us sit beneath the willows and listen to the gentle pluck of the kin as a scholar sings of distant mountains and the fleeting nature of life. The Tang and Song gave China its poetic soul, its scholarly heart, and its aesthetic grace. They nurtured a civilization not only of might, but of mind, of invention and introspection. As we end this chapter, feel the quiet elegance of a song garden. Hear the laughter of children at play, the rustle of silk robes in a courtyard, the chime of a wind bell above a scholar's desk. Let this world stay with you as you gently drift. Next, we follow the path of conquest into the era of emperors from the steppes, the Yuan and Ming dynasties. As we continue floating down the quiet river of time, the world of the song begins to fade. The fragrance of ink and plum blossoms gives way to the sound of galloping hooves across the northern plains. Now begins an era of conquest and change, a time when emperors wore fur-lined robes and the Great Wall faced its fiercest test. We enter the age of the Yuan and Ming dynasties. In the early 13th century, a storm gathered on China's northern frontier. The Mongols, fierce horsemen of the steppe, united under a single leader, Genghis Khan. His empire stretched from the Korean peninsula to the plains of Hungary, the largest contiguous land empire in world history. Though Genghis Khan himself did not conquer all of China, his grandson would. In 1271, Kublai Khan, having already subdued northern China, declared the founding of the Yuan Dynasty, and by 1279, he completed the conquest of the southern Song. For the first time in its long history, all of China was ruled by a non-Han dynasty. Imagine the imperial court moved to Dadu, present-day Beijing, a city built with Mongol grandeur and Chinese elegance. It was a capital of contrasts, wide streets lined with tents and palaces, Buddhist stupas beside Confucian halls, Mongol nobles sharing wine with Persian astronomers and Indian merchants. Kublai Khan embraced many aspects of Chinese rule. He kept the traditional administrative structure, employed Confucian scholars, and expanded public works. Yet, the Yuan also introduced their own practices. The civil service exams were suspended for a time, and Mongols held privileged positions in government. Society during the Yuan was divided by a rigid hierarchy. At the top were the Mongols, followed by Central Asians, then Northern Chinese, and finally the Southern Chinese. This stratification bred resentment, but it also fostered a degree of cosmopolitanism. The Silk Road thrived once more, protected by Mongol soldiers. Goods, ideas, and travelers crossed continents. Among them was Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant who spent years at Kublai Khan's court. In his writings, he marveled at the organization, the wealth, and the size of Chinese cities. His tales would later shape Europe's understanding of the East part fact, part wonder. Despite these achievements, the Yuan faced deep challenges. Floods, famine, and corruption eroded public trust. Successive rulers lacked Kublai Khan's strength, and rebellions simmered beneath the surface. By the mid-14th century, the Red Turban Rebellion erupted. Among the rebels was a poor orphaned monk named Zhu Yuanzhang. With determination and vision, he rose through the ranks, leading a massive popular uprising. In 1368, he captured Dadu and declared the beginning of the Ming Dynasty. Zhu Yuanzhang became Emperor Hongwu, and his reign marked a return to native rule and traditional values. He re-established the civil service exams, rebuilt agricultural infrastructure, and moved the capital to Nanjing. His vision was rooted in self-sufficiency, moral discipline, and Confucian orthodoxy. Life under the Ming began with renewal. Fields were restored, canals dredged, and taxes standardized. The emperor's word was law, and the state bureaucracy grew more elaborate. Officials were chosen through rigorous exams, which tested not only knowledge of Confucian classics, but also poetic and calligraphic skill. Yet even in this structured world, there was beauty. The Ming era produced exquisite blue and white porcelain, renowned worldwide for its delicate elegance. Literature flourished, including vernacular novels such as Journey to the West and The Water Margin, stories that blended myth, folklore, and social commentary. The Ming court was also curious about the wider world. In the early 15th century, Emperor Yongle commissioned the great voyages of Zheng He, a Muslim eunuch and admiral. His fleet of vast treasure ships sailed as far as the Arabian coast and the Swahili ports of East Africa. Laden with silks and porcelain, they exchanged goods and tribute, displaying China's power with grace rather than conquest. Picture the harbor at Nanjing, filled with towering ships carved with dragons, their sails catching the morning breeze. Sailors loaded jars of tea, spices, and scrolls. Musicians played farewell songs as the fleet vanished over the horizon, a floating city on the waves. Despite this outward expansion, the Ming would later retreat inward. Following Zheng He's last voyage, maritime exploration was halted. Shipbuilding was restricted. The court grew wary of foreign influence, and China turned its gaze back toward the land. The Great Wall, neglected under the Mongols, was rebuilt and fortified. What we see today, its sweeping stone battlements snaking over hills, is largely a Ming creation. Guard towers and beacons stood watch over the northern frontier, a silent sentinel against invasion. As time passed, the Ming court became increasingly isolated. Eunuchs gained influence, court intrigue deepened, and emperors grew detached from the people. Natural disasters were interpreted as signs of heaven's displeasure. Peasant unrest grew, and the once glorious dynasty began to falter. In the early 17th century, amid plague and famine, the Manchus, a people from the northeast, crossed the Great Wall. In 1644, the Ming capital fell, and the last emperor hanged himself in a garden of blooming apricot trees. The dynasty had ended, but its memory endured as a time of cultural pride, imperial dignity, and artistic refinement. Now, let us pause and breathe. Let us walk once more along a Ming garden path, winding past lotus ponds, carved bridges, and rock formations like frozen waves, the brush of bamboo against stone, the hum of a distant zither, the feeling that even in endings, beauty remains. As we bring this chapter to a close, reflect on the twin legacies of the Yuan and the Ming, the former a bridge to the wider world, the latter a return to roots. One expanded, one restored. One looked out, the other turned inward. Both shaped the path ahead. Next, we arrive at the final dynasty of imperial China, the Qing, where tradition and transformation would meet for the last time. As the Ming twilight fades, we step gently into the dawn of a new power rising from the northeast, the Qing Dynasty, the final chapter in the story of imperial China. Founded in 1644 by the Manchu people, the Qing would rule for nearly 270 years, overseeing both expansion and upheaval, brilliance and sorrow. It is a dynasty of refinement and resilience, where ancient traditions met the modern world. The Manchus, once known as the Urchins, were skilled horsemen and archers from beyond the Great Wall. When the Ming fell to internal rebellion, the Manchus crossed into China, not simply as conquerors, but as careful rulers seeking to preserve the empire's core. They adopted many Ming customs and institutions, preserving the Confucian bureaucratic system while adding their own distinct customs, like the queue hairstyle, which all men were required to wear as a symbol of loyalty. The early Qing emperors ruled with wisdom and restraint. Among the most admired was Kangxi, who reigned from 1661 to 1722. A child prodigy and lifelong scholar, Kangxi traveled extensively throughout the empire, seeking to understand his people. Under his leadership, China enjoyed peace, prosperity, and cultural flourishing. He opened dialogues with Jesuit missionaries, supported scientific study, and patronized Confucian scholars. His grandson, Qianlong, continued this legacy. His reign, one of the longest in history, marked the peak of Qing power. Under Qianlong, the empire reached its greatest territorial extent, stretching from the forests of Siberia to the jungles of Vietnam, from the mountains of Tibet to the deserts of Xinjiang. At court, Qianlong was both a warrior and a poet. He composed over 40,000 poems in his lifetime and curated vast collections of art, calligraphy, and rare books. He commissioned the monumental Siku Quanshu, the largest collection of Chinese literature ever compiled, preserving centuries of knowledge and expression. Daily life in Qing China was complex and vibrant. In the cities, artisans carved intricate ivory miniatures, wove silk robes embroidered with phoenixes and dragons, and painted vast scrolls of mountains swirled in mist. Tea culture blossomed not only as a beverage, but as a ritual of elegance and mindfulness. In the countryside, farmers tended rice paddies, orchards, and tea plantations, often living in tight-knit clans under ancestral temples. Education remained central. Boys studied the 4 books and 5 classics, memorizing line after line in hopes of success in the imperial examinations. The best would rise to become jinshi, the highest level of scholar official gaining access to positions in government and respect in society. But despite this grandeur, challenges loomed. The population swelled beyond the capacity of the land. Corruption crept into the bureaucracy. And from beyond the seas, new forces stirred. By the 18th century, European powers had begun to seek access to China's riches. The British, in particular, were eager to trade, especially for tea, which had become a daily staple back home. But trade was tightly controlled, confined to the southern port of Canton, and heavily regulated by Chinese officials. When British merchants sought to expand trade, they were rebuffed. The Qianlong Emperor famously told King George III that China had no need for foreign goods. Yet the British soon found a product that would upend the balance: opium. Smuggled into China in increasing quantities, opium addiction spread rapidly, weakening communities and draining silver from the economy. In 1839, the Qing government took action, seizing and destroying large quantities of opium in Canton. The response was swift. Britain declared war. The First Opium War, fought from 1839 to 1842, ended in a devastating defeat for the Qing. The resulting Treaty of Nanjing ceded Hong Kong to Britain, opened additional treaty ports, and marked the beginning of what Chinese historians later called the Century of Humiliation. The Qing, once mighty, now faced growing internal and external pressure. Rebellions erupted across the land, the most catastrophic being the Taiping Rebellion, 1850 to 1864, a massive civil war led by a charismatic visionary claiming to be the brother of Jesus. It cost tens of millions of lives and nearly toppled the dynasty. In response to these crises, some Qing officials advocated for reform. The self-strengthening movement sought to modernize industry, military, and education by borrowing from the West while preserving Confucian values. Shipyards were built, arsenals constructed, and schools opened, but progress was slow and uneven. Meanwhile, foreign powers continued to encroach. The Second Opium War, the Sino-French War, the Sino-Japanese War, each chipped away at China's sovereignty. Spheres of influence were carved out by Britain, France, Germany, Russia, and Japan. Railway lines and telegraph wires crisscrossed the empire, but so did resentment. In 1898, the 100 Days Reform, a bold but short-lived effort to restructure China's government, economy, and education, was abruptly ended by conservative forces in the court, led by the powerful Empress Dowager Cixi. A woman of formidable will, Cixi ruled behind the curtain for decades, balancing reform and tradition, often accused of lavish excess and political intrigue. In 1900, the Boxer Rebellion erupted, a violent anti-foreign, anti-Christian uprising led by a secret society that believed in spiritual invincibility. Though fueled by patriotism, it ended in tragedy. Foreign armies invaded Beijing, looting the capital and forcing the Qing to pay heavy indemnities. By the early 20th century, the imperial system teetered on the edge. Reformist intellectuals, influenced by Western ideas of democracy and nationalism, called for radical change. Among them was Sun Yat-sen, a visionary who dreamed of a modern republic. In 1911, following an uprising in Wuchang, the Xinhai Revolution swept across China. Provinces declared independence. The imperial army, long weakened, could no longer suppress the movement. In 1912, the last emperor, Puyi, a 6-year-old boy, abdicated the throne. After over 2,000 years of dynasties, imperial China was no more. Yet even as the dragon throne fell, its legacy endured. The traditions, philosophies, and institutions built over millennia continued to shape modern China, a country both ancient and evolving. As we bring this chapter to a close, let us picture the final days of the Qing court. Lanterns sway gently in the corridors of the Forbidden City. Snow falls silently over tiled rooftops. Inside, scrolls, robes, and jade seals are packed away. A new world waits beyond the palace walls. Let your thoughts linger in that twilight moment between empires, a moment of stillness, of endings and beginnings. The last dynasty may have passed, but the echoes of the emperors remain. Next, in our final chapter, we reflect on the legacy of China's dynasties, the wisdom they left, and the dreams they inspired. As we float gently beyond the fall of the Qing, a calm settles in the stillness that follows the long exhale of history. Over 4,000 years of imperial rule have passed before us like a great river, winding from the misty legends of the Xia to the velvet-draped halls of the Forbidden City. Now, in the quiet of reflection, we ask, what remains? The legacy of China's dynasties is not found solely in monuments or scrolls. It lives on in ideas, in language, in rhythms of life still pulsing through villages and cities alike. It endures in the memory of governance, in the contours of art, and in the moral compass shaped by centuries of philosophy. Let us begin with Confucianism, the bedrock of imperial thought. First articulated in the Warring States period and later refined by scholars under the Han, Tang, and Song dynasties, Confucian ideals still echo in modern Chinese society. Concepts like filial piety, ritual propriety, and the duty of rulers to serve with virtue continue to influence education, law, and interpersonal relationships. The civil service exam, though no longer in use, laid the foundation for merit-based governance long before it became common in the West. The mandate of heaven, too, has left a quiet mark. Though its political role faded with the collapse of dynastic rule, its moral framework that rulers must be just or lose legitimacy remains a powerful lens through which many still interpret authority and responsibility. Architecturally, the splendor of the dynasties surrounds us. The Great Wall, stretching like a dragon across the northern mountains, is a testament to endurance and defense. The Forbidden City, with its vast courtyards, vermilion gates, and golden roofs, speaks of cosmic order and imperial grandeur. In Suzhou, tranquil gardens continue to model the balance between human design and natural harmony. And in humble villages, ancient courtyard houses and winding lanes still breathe the rhythms of dynastic life. Artistically, dynastic China gifted the world with exquisite beauty. Calligraphy, more than a form of writing, became a spiritual art, each stroke a reflection of the soul. Landscape painting evolved into a form of meditation, where misty peaks and solitary scholars invited viewers into realms of contemplation. Porcelain, especially during the Ming and Qing periods, brought Chinese artistry to global markets, becoming prized in courts and collections across Europe and beyond. And then, there is the literary heritage. The classic of poetry, the Book of Documents, the philosophical writings of Laozi and Zhuangzi, the historical chronicles of Sima Qian, the romantic epics like Journey to the West and Dream of the Red Chamber, all are threads in the tapestry of world literature. These works do more than tell stories. They reveal how dynastic China saw the universe, its people, and the balance between fate and virtue. In daily life, echoes of the dynasties remain. The celebration of the Lunar New Year, the Sao, custom of offering incense at ancestral graves, the practice of feng shui, and even the preparation of traditional dishes all carry the DNA of 1,000 generations. Modern China, with its cities of glass and steel, still draws from this deep well. Its legal codes, family structures, educational values, and even foreign policy instincts often trace back to dynastic patterns. In times of upheaval and calm, Chinese thinkers have looked backward to understand the present, seeking answers not in novelty, but in continuity. The global legacy is profound as well. Chinese inventions such as papermaking, printing, the compass, and gunpowder reshaped the world. Concepts of centralized bureaucracy and civil service influenced other nations' political development. And in the arts and sciences, the dynasties of China have inspired generations of scholars, poets, architects, and philosophers from east to west. But perhaps the greatest legacy lies not in what was built or written, but in the endurance of a civilization. While empires rose and fell elsewhere, China's dynasties, though often disrupted, passed a continuous thread of cultural identity. Through conquest, natural disaster and reform, a sense of Chineseness endured, a shared script, a reverence for ancestors, a belief in harmony and hierarchy. It is not a simple legacy. There were injustices, rigid hierarchies, moments of cruelty and control. Dynasties both uplifted and suppressed, but within this complexity lies richness, a mirror of the human experience itself. As we conclude this journey, let your thoughts drift back through time, to the Neolithic farmers along the Yellow River who pressed millet into the soil under early skies, to the Xia and Shang kings casting bronze vessels and calling upon spirits, to the Qin raising walls of stone and standardizing the written word, to the Han opening silk roads under the desert moon, to the Tang where golden pavilions glowed with poetry and perfume, to the Song where a scholar's brush traced mountains into the mist, to the Yuan galloping across steppes with the thunder of hooves, to the Ming guarding the gates of a forbidden city carved from order, to the Qing watching snow fall upon the dragon throne as a new world waited beyond the walls. Each dynasty, a chapter, each emperor, a verse, each village, a line in the poem of China. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and your breath deepens, let this river of memory carry you gently. The dynasties have passed, but their stories remain whispering in the wind, etched in the mountains, floating on the tea-scented air of timeless mornings. Sleep now, with history wrapped softly around you. The journey is complete.